Okay, I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, Peter Dunn, who's also known as Pete the Planner. He's an award-winning comedian and financial mind. Of course, I was more interested in the comedy, but I think you may find the topic of today's show is not quite as comic. Pete, I want to talk to you about some of the topics you've written and spoken about, which is the financial aspects of divorce. Can we dive into that?
Of course, Doug, and thanks for having me.
You bet. Let me ask you, if your soon-to-be ex was the one who used to handle the money, and now you have to start taking over it, how do you deal with that, especially if you really don't have a lot of experience in household finance?
Yeah, I got to think you begin with realizing that it is a fresh start. And so the old way of doing things may have been good, they may have been bad, but now you get to weigh in a little more, which by the way, I think in any relationship, both people should be highly involved with the finances, not out of fear that you could someday get divorced, because I think it's just better for the relationship. People list money as one of the most intimate things in their lives. And if that's the case, I want to make sure I'm on the same page as my partner, both before the relationship ends and after the relationship ends.
Amen to that. Certainly people should be working on their money together. But in the event that you can't, what are some of the mistakes that you see people make that maybe by listening to us here today, they could not make them if they end up in a separation?
I think people, when life gets abnormal and when stress comes via a divorce, people try to hang their hat on the idea of keeping things as they were. And they say, well, hey, if I can't be comfortable personally and socially and all those sorts of things, at least I want to have the same things I've always had. And Doug, I think that's the biggest mistake. And I think the biggest iteration of that is when someone fights to keep the house, that they're the one that wants to stay in the family home. And anecdotally, what I see is the wrong person fights to keep the home. And I've had divorce lawyers tell me for years, one of the worst things you can do in a divorce is to fight to keep the home, because it's something that creates such a huge financial burden when a household income splits into two.
So go into that a little bit more. You're saying that when someone gets divorced, he or she thinks, wow, I really want to keep the house for whatever reason, probably because they think it's very valuable, but really maintaining it is just so difficult?
Yeah, they want to keep the house for all sorts of reasons. Like you said, well, we raised our kids there. I need a place to sort of anchor my feelings and thoughts. I don't want to both get divorced, have to get a job, and move to a new place. So it seems practical to try to stay where you're at, and financially, many times the math doesn't work. If the household income divides, then there's a pretty good chance that from a percentage standpoint, the expenditures going towards housing, well, again, depending on how the income split up, could double. I mean, you could be spending 50% of your income to try to maintain your housing versus doing what's right and cutting that closer to 25 to 30% of take-home pay.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the portfolio. Let's say that you've got a portfolio of stocks and bonds together with your spouse, and then you split up. What would be some considerations people should think about in dividing that money?
I think that's where good attorneys come into play as well, because it can be the give and take. Well, I'd rather have this and you'd rather have that. I have found, though, that usually one party is disengaged from the investing part of life. You may have one person that handles the day-to-day, but the other person handles the investments. So it's that person that does not handle the investments that needs good counsel, because they don't know what they're giving up, and they don't know, if they get stuck with, the bad part of the portfolio, or if they get stuck with an account that, the person in the know says, you know what, you go ahead and just take that account. Meanwhile, the thing's underwater and not worth much. That's where good counsel comes into play. But I don't know about you, Doug. I rarely see two people that are highly engaged in the inner workings of their investments.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue. And even though we preach a lot about the importance of husbands and wives coming to meetings together and getting involved together. In fact, it's funny, I made a short video on my corporate website about answering the question, should couples come to their financial planning meetings together? And the punchline was, you should come to the financial planning meetings together, but if one of you is just more interested in choosing the specific investments, that I'm willing to delegate to one or the other. But you do see it really ends up as a problem if there's a divorce and then one spouse who has no experience really has to handle the whole thing. We're talking with Pete the Planner, Peter Dunn, who is an award-winning financial writer. Maybe you've seen him on CNN, on Fox. I guess, Pete, you've written about 10 books, certainly sharing a lot of information. We've been talking so far about some of the financial implications of divorce. I want to touch on something you said earlier, which was the stress that goes along with it. A lot of times we'll tell someone when you receive an inheritance, unless there's something urgent to do, the first thing you should do is nothing, because people that are under a lot of stress because of the loss, and then they end up making bad decisions. But in a divorce, you can't do that. How do you recommend people make smart decisions even when they're under such great stress?
I see people make permanent decisions with temporary issues. So you'll see someone buy a house right away, instead of renting for 6 months to get some clarity. I think there's a way to do nothing without doing nothing. And I think not making permanent decisions when you don't have to is a good way to go. I don't know. I've always believed that that renting has its place. And a lot of people don't feel that way. I just think it does, and I think if you can find a month-to-month or a 6-month lease that allows you to restructure your life and get back on your feet, then it takes the emotion out of it. I've always felt that money magnifies who you are. So whether you get an inheritance, or you receive an inheritance, or you have now less money because of a divorce to work with on a monthly basis, your personality is really going to come out. And so I think if that is in fact true, you got to give yourself some room to feel out your new expenses. And I think jumping right back into home ownership or committing to new monthly obligations is a big challenge, which is hard to overcome.
Tell me about some of the health insurance issues that people have to be concerned with when they get divorced.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues there. It depends. I've seen it go down a lot of different ways. You can have some exceptions here and there, but ultimately one person has to split off the other person's policy. And if the person that splits off is not employed, then you have to go sort of to the public marketplace to find health insurance, which can be a lot more expensive than health insurance that's subsidized by an employer. And to your point, that's one of the true forgotten expenses that is incurred when two households come from one.
Mm-hmm. So there's the insurance issue. There's also things like life insurance or disability insurance. How should people deal with that?
Not too different. I think the first place that many people turn is to change their beneficiary on those.
Not that rascal.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially if children are involved. Ultimately, whatever disagreement or whatever caused the divorce, most folks still want what's best for their offspring. And so at times it could make sense to create a trust as the beneficiary of a life insurance contract instead of the person you just divorced. I see that quite often. But again, I think a lot of this has to do, is it a 2-income household or is it a 1-income household? This conversation gets incredibly difficult when you take a 1-income household that then the other person has to go out and begin a career from scratch. And maybe sometimes they haven't been in the workforce for a decade or more.
Mm-hmm. And how about estate planning? These days, because when I started in the business almost 25 years ago, we used to talk all the time about avoiding estate tax or death tax because the limits were relatively low. They were $600,000-$700,000. Today, most people do not have to worry about paying an estate tax. What are the estate planning issues that they should be considering if they're no longer married?
We don't dive too deep into the estate planning issues here at our shop in terms of divorce, but it often becomes an extension of the legal work they're doing with their what are now called relationship transition attorneys. I don't know if you know that, Doug. That's what divorce attorneys call themselves now.
I like that term. All right.
Yes. Fantastic. So that's going to probably be an extension of what they're doing to make all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
Mm-hmm. All right. Pete, we've really covered a lot. We've actually learned a lot about some of the issues that people have to think about when they divorce, not just about splitting up the money and dealing with the kids, but where they're going to live and what the insurance issues are. But unfortunately, we are just about out of time. So in the last few seconds, just tell me, how can people follow you and follow your work?
No, I appreciate you asking, Doug. PeteThePlanner.com, and of course, Pete the Planner on Twitter. We've got a new book coming out the end of this year, and so just keep abreast as to what's happening at PeteThePlanner.com or Pete the Planner on Twitter.
Okay, we will put links to those at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Peter Dunn, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for your time, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world. But if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.